Today we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing decimals. So in your table of contents, you can go ahead and write the date, and then you can write multiply or divide with question marks and exclamation points, because sometimes when you have word problems, they're not going to be all division or all multiplication or all addition or all subtraction. You have to figure out with word problems what's the best operation to use. Okay, so this is Objective 5 in BT 7. And today we're not only going to be talking about division, which is what we've been focusing on for a while, but we're also going to try to decide between multiplying and dividing. So, multiplication problems. This is typically when I know the number of groups and the size of each group. What I'm trying to figure out in multiplication problems is my total. So if it's a multiplication problem, I'm trying to figure out my total. They'll tell me the number of groups and they'll tell me the size of each group, and I'll be responsible for figuring out my total. Okay? If it is division, okay, I will know my total. That'll be something I definitely know. I will either know the size of my group or the number of groups. So two things I will know when I have division. I'll know my total, that's for certain. I will know my total, my end amount, my total amount, I will know the total when I'm dividing. They will tell me that in my word problem. And they'll either give me the size of my group or they'll tell me the number of groups I need with that total. When I'm figuring out, I could be figuring out one of two things with division problems. I could either figure out the number of groups or I may figure out the size of each group. So for example, with multiplication, okay, if it's a multiplying problem, they might tell me that Jill has 3 bottles of water. Each bottle has 3/10 liters of water. How much water does Jill have in all? So that's all multiplying. Here, they told me the number of groups, right here, there's 3 bottles of water. There's my number of groups. Okay. And here they told me the size of each group. How much is in each of those groups? What do I have to find? I have to find in all my total. That's what I'm figuring out. Okay? So I know that that's multiplying versus dividing because they gave me the number of groups, they gave me the size of each group, and they want me to figure out the total. Okay? Now division would be the opposite. Jill has 9/10 liters of water. She has several water bottles. If each bottle has 0 3/10 liters, how many bottles does Jill have? So here, they give me the total. There's my total. 9/10 liters. They tell me that each bottle has 0 3/10 liters. There's my size of each group. They want to know how many bottles. They want me to tell them how many groups. That's what I'm figuring out. The number of groups, or how many groups. So again, multiplication, you're going to know the number of groups and you will know the size of each group, and you have to figure out the total if it's multiplying. For division, they're going to give you the total, and they'll either give you the size or the number of groups, and you have to figure out whichever one they didn't give you, number of groups or size. Okay? We're going to look at some example problems and see if we can use these to identify what operation we need to use. Okay? Let's look at real-world decimal multiplication and division problems first. Notice there's one that says homework on it. We're not looking at the homework page. We're looking at the actual real-world multiplication and division word problems. Okay? It says solve the following problems. Use concrete models or drawings, which may include base 10 grids, area models, or number lines. Use estimation to determine if the answer makes sense. Okay? Let's read number 1. School lunches cost $2.25 each day. How much would 1 week, 5 days of lunches cost? So what I know right here, the $2.25, I know this right here is if it says each day, and they want to know how much for 1 week, I know this is the size of each group, or the cost for each lunch. When I say size of groups, I just mean if I were thinking about it using base 10 pieces or something like that, that would be how much goes into each group, because that's the cost of one of the items that I'm considering. Okay? And then here it says how much would 1 week, 5 days of lunches cost. So 5 days, whoops, I'm sorry guys, I hit my iPad. So 5 days is actually the number of groups. They want to know how much it would cost for all 5 days. They want me to figure out the total. So that means I'm multiplying. In my notes, when I have to figure out the total, I multiply. When they give me the size of each group and the number of groups, I have to multiply. So my equation would be $2.25 times 5 wholes. Now, I can use base 10 grids and shade in $2.25 5 times. I could use area models and set up my boxes and multiply 5 times 2, 5 times 2/10, 5 times 5/100. Or I could use repeated addition and add $2.25 5 times. There's a lot of different strategies I could use to solve that. You have notes in your notebook for what to do, what the strategies are for multiplying decimal numbers. Okay? Number 2, we're not going to solve it right now. We're going to come back to it later. Keith went for a run on Saturday. He ran for 2 4/10 miles. The greenway had markers to show every 4/10 of a mile. How many markers did Keith see on his run? So, here he ran for 2 4/10 miles. That's his total. They gave me the total amount that he ran. The greenway had markers to show every 4/10 of a mile. That's my size of each group. Okay, that's the size of each set of miles we're considering. Here's his total. I have the size of each group. Therefore, I need to figure out how many groups I have. If I have the total and the size of each group, I am dividing. Okay, so I have to figure out how many groups. How many groups of 4/10 of a mile did he run? Or how many markers is what it's asking me. So I'm going to take his total, 2 4/10, and divide it by 0 4/10. Because this is a decimal, divided by decimal, I have two strategies I could use. Base 10 grids or pieces. I would box out my total, 2 4/10, 2 wholes 4/10, and I would shade in 4/10 at a time and count how many groups of 4/10 I have. Okay? Let's look at number 3. Debbie walks 1 7/10 miles to school. Her friend Jason walks 0 3/10 as far as Debbie. How far does Jason walk to school? Okay? So this is Debbie walks 1 7/10 miles. Her friend Jason walks 0 3/10 as far as. Okay? So this tells me, this one's a little bit trickier, but this is basically the size of Debbie's groups. And if he walks 0 3/10 as far as, if Jason walks 0 3/10 as far as, when I see as far as, that's kind of a signal word to multiply. Okay, because if this is how much Debbie walks and he walks this as far as, and that means I multiply these numbers to see what Jason walks. So this doesn't quite work like we said in our notes where I have number of groups or size of each group, but I'm figuring out the total that Jason walks here. So 1 7/10 times 0 3/10. Since I have a decimal multiplying by a decimal, I need to look back at my notes for multiplying decimals, decide which strategy would work best. Okay? What I would like for you to do from here, just like we've done for these first 3 problems, you are going to do for number 4 and number 5. You're not going to solve it, but you are going to decide if it's multiplying or dividing. Write out your equation for each number 4 and number 5. Okay, and then you're going to come to the homework page and you're going to choose 2 problems to solve. Okay, to actually solve. So in those 2 problems, you'll write it out like this to start with. You'll make an estimation, and then you will solve it. I have to see all of those steps. If I see all of those steps, if I see that you took number 4 and number 5, you wrote out your equation, you wrote whether we needed to multiply or divide, okay? And then you chose 2 problems from here. You wrote whether we were multiplying or dividing based on what we did in our notes. You made an estimation. You wrote an actual answer, compared your answer to your estimate. If I see that for 2 problems on this homework page, you may have 10 tickets tomorrow, okay? See you guys tomorrow.